Hey, how you going there, peeps? Phil here from MTG Kiwi Philosophy here again. And as we spoke of in my last video, I was going to make a brawl deck, and I've done this. I've made myself a blue-white historic control deck. But not only that, it's rotation proof, so we're only using cards from Echelon Block and Dominaria. So here it is, guys. I hope you enjoy the brew. Peace out.
White historic control.
Okay guys, I'm guessing by the picture in the background that you've guessed that our commander for this blue-white historic control deck is none other than Raff Capashen, the ship's mage. Yes, this 4-drop bad boy with 3/3 flying and flash with historic flash spells is a beautiful piece. And the thing I like about it the most is it's only a 4-drop. We don't want something that's going to be a 6-drop as a commander that we want to play again at 8 and then again at 10. We want to make sure that we can start off low and we can flash it in at the right time so we can at least gain an advantage from it. So once we have Raff Capashen in play, we really need to be able to protect our commander. So we're going to run through a few protection spells, and the first of those spells is Adamant Will. I love Adamant Will. It's a 2-drop, 1 plane, 1 other, instant speed, target creature gets +2/+2 and gains indestructible till the end of the turn. The beauty of this, it can be used as a combat trick, and we can trade off one of our opponent's creatures and our board presence will start to grow. Secondly, the next spell is going to be Sheltering Light. Sheltering Light is very similar to Adamant Will, except it's just 1-drop, 1 plane to cast at instant speed, and target creature gains indestructible till the end of the turn, and you get to scry 1. So this is going to help us dig through some of our deck, whether we're looking for land or we want a spell we're trying to get to, or even just to advance our board. It's a really good card. Moving on to the next spell, Dive Down. Now Dive Down is also once again a little bit similar to Sheltering Light, but in the case where it's 1 blue, instant speed, and target creature you control gets +3 and gains hexproof until the end of the turn. So it's not indestructible, but it is going to give us a buff in defense and also prevent those removal spells from being able to destroy our creatures. It's going to save us from exile, which is something that Adamant Will and Sheltering Light doesn't do, of course. Moving on to the next card after this, and that is going to be Negate. Now Negate, we all know Negate, it's a 2-drop spell, instant speed, 1 blue, 1 other, and we can counter target non-creature spell. So the beauty of Negate is, once again, it's going to be able to protect some of our creatures from spells. It won't protect us from combat, but it can protect us from combat tricks. But I do love Negate. It's very flexible. We can prevent enchantments from coming down as well, and also anything that's going to help advance our opponent's board. And of course, last of all, the card that I've got that we're going to use to help protect and also just advance our board, and that is going to be Syncopate. Now I love Syncopate. It is a 1 blue and X spell. You can counter target spell unless the controller pays X. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it in the owner's graveyard. So being able to exile a spell is fantastic. Even if they're trying to drop a bomb creature into play, we remove it. If they're trying to exile our creature, we counter that. It's very, very flexible. So when you think of syncopating the deck in the curve, don't think of it immediately as something that sits up in the 6 range or the 6 drop, because it can be anywhere across the board depending on basically, what's relevant at the time. Okay, so let's start talking about our low end of the curve. And we're going to start that off with one of our creatures, and that is Dauntless Bodyguard. Now, a lot of people think this card is not super good. I think it's underrated. I think it's a great card. A 1-drop creature that you can give another creature indestructible if you sacrifice it. That's fantastic. It's 2/1, sure, there we go. We can trade that off if we need to, but the thing is, having a 1-drop creature with 2 in attack early game and getting it to play, we're easily going to get 2 to 4 damage in before our opponent's going to be able to respond, which is fantastic. And if we want to flash in and Raff and then cast this, we can give Raff indestructible. Any of our creatures for that matter. Our next 1-drop creature we've got is Skymarcher Aspirant. Now the Skymarcher Aspirant is good again as well. Early game we've got a 2/1 creature that's going to be able to put a little bit of pressure on the board, and late game if we have Ascend, then the creature's going to have evasion, it's going to have flying, which is going to be good for us as well. So this card balances out very nice early or late game. Well, let's move it on to our 2-drop creatures now, and the first of our 2-drop creatures is Adanto Vanguard. This 2-drop creature, 1 plane and 1 other, it's a 1/1 vampire, but as long as it's attacking, it gets +2 in attack, which is fantastic because its secondary ability is, if you pay 4 life, it gains indestructible to the end of the turn. So if we can get lifelink on some sort of our creatures and we can constantly get in with this guy, he's always going to be a threat. And that's great for us early game. Now let's move on to the next one, which is our lovely Knight of Grace. This 2-drop, one plane and one other. It is first strike, hexproof from black. Knight of Grace gets +1 as long as any player controls a black permanent. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Warkite Marauder is yet another 2-drop that is going to be fantastic for our deck. This one blue and one other pirate that flies 2/1. Whenever the Marauder attacks, target creature defending player controls loses all of its abilities and becomes a creature with base power of 0/1. This is fantastic for us. It leaves them vulnerable and it means weak for the picking. Okay, well let's move on. What blue-white historic deck would be without this card? And that is Relic Runner. I love the Relic Runner. It is one blue, one other. It's 2/1, but the Relic Runner cannot be blocked if you cast a historic spell this turn. Now, we have 18 historic spells in this deck that we're going to be able to cast. So we're going to have quite a few frequent spells coming down that are going to be able to get this guy through. Moving on now. This beautiful piece of work, Tetsuko Umerzwa, one blue, one other. It's 1/3, and its ability is creatures you control with the power and toughness of 1 or less cannot be blocked. So we have the Vanguard, we have the Bodyguard, we have the Relic Runner, we have Tetsuko himself, we have the Skymarcher Aspirant, and we have the Warkite Marauder. These all have 1 toughness or 1 power. That means we have 6 unblockable creatures. Moving on now. Blackblade Reforged. This historic 2-drop legendary artifact equipment is beautiful. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 equal to the number of lands you control. Equip 3 to legendary creature, equip 7 to a standard creature. So this is going to be really awesome for us. If we have Raff in play, we can flash it in, equip it, and deal some serious damage. The great thing about Blackblade Reforged is it's a threat no matter who's on the board. If you've got the mana to be able to equip it to a standard creature or a legendary creature, your opponents know that this is lethal. Moving on now. As part of our removal strategy, we've got Seal Away in our deck. Now, Seal Away is a beautiful 2-drop enchantment, one plane, one other, that has flash. When Seal Away enters the battlefield, exile target tapped creature an opponent controls until Seal Away leaves the battlefield. Moving on now. Treasure Map is perfect for our deck. It's a 2-drop artifact that when you pay 1 and tap it, you get to scry and you put a counter on the treasure map. When the treasure map has 3 counters on it, you can then transform it into the Treasure Cove, which is a land that taps for 1 color's mana, or tap and sacrifice a treasure to draw a card. Now the beauty of this thing is that the treasure map is not only going to help us with our historic when it enters the battlefield, but it's also going to help us search for stuff into our library and also advance our board towards historic and also towards ascension if we need it, which is going to be fantastic. Secondly, when it's flipped, it's going to help us with our drawing, which is going to be even better. So it's going to help us draw into some better cards, and it's going to help us advance our board, and it's going to help us keep the historic theme going. Right, let's move on to our 3-drops now. And the first of our 3-drops are Skiteting Surveyor. Oh, I love this historic 3-drop artifact creature. It's 1/2, but when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a basic land card and put it into your hand tapped. You get to advance your board and also search up your money you need to make sure you can cast the spells you need. It also triggers historic and it puts a blocker on the field. Not only that, but it's also 1/2, so this creature can become unblockable if we have Tetsuko in play as well. Let's move on to our next 3-drop, and we're going to go with Invoke the Divine. This 3-drop instant speed spell is fantastic. Destroy a target artifact or enchantment and you gain 4 life. So the beauty of this is we can target either of those 2 at instant speed, and we all know how many artifacts and enchantments have come through Dominaria. This card is a must. Well, let's move on to our next 3-drop, and that is Kinjalli's Sunwing. This 3-drop dinosaur that flies has creatures your opponent controls enters the battlefield tapped. It is 2/3, so it's not super powerful, but the ability is very helpful for us. Being able to tap down our opponent's creatures so that we can be more offensive, this is fantastic for us. Okay, well let's keep it simple and let's get into the next one. Our next 3-drop is none other than Raff's sister, Danitha Capashen. This historic legendary knight is first strike vigilance lifelink and she's 2/2, but her secondary ability is auras and equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So the fantastic thing about this is if we have 4 mana left at the end of our turn and Raff's in play, we can cast Danitha and the Blackblade Reforged, equip it the following turn, and if we have 6 land in play, we can swing in with this vicious first strike vigilance lifelink 8/8 beast of a creature. Okay, so let's move on to our last 3-drop, and that is History of Benalia. This 3-drop historic saga is going to be fantastic for us. The first 2 abilities giving us create a 2/2 white knight with vigilance. It's going to be fantastic. So we're going to have 2 vigilance knights after 2 turns, and then on the 3rd turn, knights you control get +2 and +1 until the end of the turn. Now, here's the thing. We have other knights in our deck. We also have the Dauntless Bodyguard. We also have the Knight of Grace. And we also have Danitha. So we've got all these things that are going to synergize with each other. And this is also going to trigger Historic. And you know what else is Historic? Our next card, which is our first of our 4-drops, and that is Kwende, the Pride of Femeref. This 2/2 double strike knight. It is 2/2, but it's so powerful because it gives all of your creatures with first strike double strike. So it's going to give our Knight of Grace double strike, it's going to give Danitha double strike, and any of our other creatures with first strike double strike. It is really fantastic, and I do think Kwende is awesome when he's flashed in, because you can flash in Kwende, and if our opponent has let Danitha or even the Knight of Grace through, you're flashing Kwende and you're doubling up on that damage. It's fantastic. Okay, well, let's move on to our next 4-drop then. And that is Traxos, Scourge of Krug. This historic legendary artifact creature has trample. It's 7/7, and it also has Traxos, Scourge of Krug enters the battlefield tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. However, whenever you cast a historic spell, you untap Traxos. Now, the beautiful thing is about this, he only costs 4. We have 18 historic spells in our deck, and the chances of him untapping in our deck are very high. He has 7/7. So one thing I like about Traxos is we can use him with our historic spells having flash with Raff as a very good defensive tool. So our opponent attacks us, he thinks we haven't got anything to block with, we flash in some sort of historic spell, we untap Traxos. It is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it. It's even better going forward. If we can equip the Blackblade to it, we're going to be dealing some serious trample damage with that too. Okay, well, let's move on to our next card now, and that is Zahid, Djinn of the Lamp. Now, the reason I've got this in my 4-drop is because of his ability. The ability he has is, you may pay 4 and tap an untapped artifact you control rather than paying this spell's mana cost. So, having a 4-drop, 5/6 flying, legendary, historic creature is fantastic, and all we have to do is tap an artifact. I think we should try and make this work. Being able to do that is fantastic. Having to put a 4 mana creature in play with a 5/6 toughness on the board with evasion is going to be really hard for our opponents to deal with. Okay, well, let's move on again. Let's do this again. Let's move on to our next card. On Sarah's Wings. This 4-drop legendary enchantment is fantastic. Enchanting a creature that becomes legendary and it gets +1/+1, has first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. So this is the thing I like about On Sarah's Wings. Here it is. It's a legendary creature. It's a legendary enchantment. So if we have Danitha in play, it's only going to cost 3 to cast. On top of that, if we have Kwende in play and we equip this to the Knight of Grace, the Knight of Grace is going to have double strike lifelink as well. And that's going to be fantastic. You can even equip it to the Adanto Vanguard. That's good too, because when it attacks, it gets +2, and we can also still pay 4 life to give it indestructible. So it's paying for itself essentially. So it does become a 4/2 creature, but it also becomes a 4/2 creature that can be indestructible, which is fantastic. And this is what I love about On Sarah's Wings. It's a threat no matter what we put it on, and our opponents have to deal with it. Okay, well, let's move on again to our next card, and that is Jorah's Familiar. Now, I love Jorah's Familiar. It is a 4-drop for only a 2/2 flying creature. However, its ability giving historic spells 1 less to cast is fantastic. Okay, so we just looked at the Onsera's Wings. It is a historic spell too, but it's also an aura. So, if we've got Jorah's Familiar in play, we also have Danitha in play, that means that Onsera's Wings is only going to cost 2 to cast, which is fantastic for us. This is going to make all of our historic spells cheaper by 1, so you can't not have one of these in your deck. It's fantastic. Alright, enough said. Let's move on to the next card. Just imagine this too. How cheap would it be to cast the Blackblade with Jorah's Familiar and Danitha in play? The Blackblade would be free to cast, so all we're really doing is paying for the equipment cost. And that's going to be fantastic because all we have to do is equip it to a legendary creature for 3 mana. Alright, let's move on to our next card then. And that is some more of our removal cards. And we are going with Exelon's Binding. This 4-drop enchantment has, whenever Exelon's Binding enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Exelon's Binding leaves the battlefield. Now, the secondary part of Exelon's Binding is not relevant because we're playing a brawl deck. However, its first ability is always important and relevant. Being able to remove things like Phyrexian Scriptures, removing all of the creatures on the board is fantastic. Being able to remove any permanent is fantastic because there is so much danger going around in a brawl deck because everyone's going to put one of the best of their cards in the deck. The last of our 4-drop cards is yet another removal card, and that is Settle the Wreckage. This 4-drop instant speed spell is fantastic for any deck that's got white that wants to remove opponent's creatures. The ability of exiling all attacking creatures target player controls at instant speed is fantastic. Yeah, the downside is that every creature destroyed, their opponent gets to put a basic land card into play. Okay, well that's all of our 4-drops now. We're going to get into some of the nitty gritty and some of our bombs now. And the first of our few bombs are Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. This historic legendary planeswalker Teferi is fantastic. His first ability being +1 and you draw a card at the beginning of your next end step, untap 2 lands. That is fantastic. Card advantage and untapping mana. What could be better when you have flash abilities? His second ability is -3 and put a target non-land permanent into its owner's library 3rd from the top. You know, that's also great. We need to bounce stuff to make sure that we can keep our board presence better. If someone's got something that can remove or destroy things we want to stay in play, we can use his secondary ability. But last of all, his ulti, -8, you get an emblem with whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent an opponent controls, which is just deadly. Every time, if we've got a draw mechanism happening, we've got the treasure map, we've also got Teferi himself. This is going to be great for us. The more we draw, the more damage we can do. Okay, well let's move on to our next bomb, and that is Lyra, the Dawnbringer. This legendary historic angel has flying, first strike and lifelink. She's 5/5 and other angels you control get +1/+1 and have lifelink. So the cool thing I like about Lyra is that if we have Kwende and we flash him into play after Lyra is attacked, you're looking at a 10/10 lifelink creature with first strike. She has evasion, she's really hard to deal with already, but flashing in Kwende and using other things like the Blackblade on her as well, she is such a dangerous bomb. She's my favourite card of the set, but then I've always been a favourite of angels. And the last of our 5-drops is Urza's Ruinous Blast. This historic legendary sorcery is a little bit complicated to cast because you need to control either a legendary creature or a planeswalker, but we've got plenty of those in our deck, so I don't see that being a problem. But the ability is great. Being able to exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary, that is going to be huge in our favour. Being able to remove any beatdown decks, any big beast from your opponent's side of the field if it's not legendary, even if they're enchantments, if they're artifacts, they're gone. Gone burger. Okay, well let's move on to our 6-drops and the last of our control cards, and that is in Bolas's Clutches. Now the beautiful thing about this, it's a historic legendary enchantment. Okay, so yeah, it costs 6 at the moment, but if we have a Jorah's Familiar and Danitha in play, it's only going to cost us 4 to flash it in at instant speed with Raff and be able to gain control of a permanent that our opponents control, which is fantastic. At instant speed, it's like a control magic. Damn, this is just evil. Okay, well, now let's move on to the last of our 2 control cards. The first of those cards is Azure the Lawbringer. This legendary historic flying sphinx who's 6/6 is a beast. He's a little bit clunky to cast, but hey, if there's only 2 colors in your deck, he's going to be easy to get out. His ability is, when Azure the Lawbringer enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during that player's next turn, which is going to be great for us. It means that our opponent's not going to be able to remove anything on our board until our next turn, which is great. And Azure's secondary ability is, whenever Azure attacks, we may pay X, 1 white and 2 blue, and if we do, you gain X life and draw X cards. So it's pretty damn good. Being able to draw, we were talking about Teferi and how we need to have some sort of drawing mechanism. If we can play Teferi and then get out Azure and then cast a huge ability off him, we're going to be able to exile a lot of our opponent's creatures or permanents and draw a lot of cards. It's going to be fantastic for us. Okay, well, let's move on to the last card in the deck before we get into our special lands, and that is Entrancing Melody. X and 2 blue, sorcery speed, gain control of target creature with converted mana cost of X. Now the beautiful thing about this is we can gain control of an opponent's legendary creature too. We can gain control of any creature, depending on where and when we want to cast this. We can hold it to late game, steal one of the bombs, or we can play it early to try and gain a little bit of advantage in the early game. It's all up to you. Okay, well, let's move on to our lands before we check out the power levels. Now, we're really only using 3 special lands if you excuse the Treasure Cove, but the first is Glacial Fortress. Now, Glacial Fortress is in there for its obvious reasons. It's going to give us the options of either a blue or a white mana. The second land we're going to have in there is Arch of Verezka. It gives us a colorless mana, but also if we have Ascend, we can pay 5 and tap it to draw a card, and that's going to be great, because once again, it's going back to Teferi's ability. If we can draw a card, then we can exile a permanent of our opponents. And we can do this at any time, so it's fantastic. And of course, the last card, the last land that we have is Field of Ruin. Now the reason we have Field of Ruin is also obvious. Yeah, you tap it for a colorless mana, but the secondary ability, paying 2 to tap it to destroy any non-basic land, is fantastic for us. And we get to search for a basic land of our own that can help with mana fixing. But, you know, if you can see our opponents are struggling or they've got special lands out there gaining advantage from, why not remove it? It's always good to have one of these in your deck. Okay, well, let's move on to the power levels now, and we'll talk about the curve. Well, as you can see, our curve is rather nice. We have 4 1-drops, 10 2-drops, 5 3-drops, 9 4-drops, 4 5-drops, and 4 6-drops. So we've got a beautiful curve going up into our 2 curve and then back up into our 4 curve. So we're making sure we're having a very strong early game. The second curve we're going to look at is a graph that's going to show us our spells and our creatures. And as you can see in the 1-drop, we've got 2 of each, which is going to give us a nice balance. And in the 2-drop, we've also got 5 of each. In the 3-drops, we've got 2 spells and we've got 3 creatures. And in the 4-drops, we have 3 spells and we have 6 creatures. In the 5-drops, we have 3 spells and 1 creature. And in the 6-drops, we also have 1 creature and 3 spells to round it out. And last of all, our pie graph. Now this is going to show us what is in our deck entirely and the percentage that it takes up in a graph. Well, that's it here from me at MTG Kiwi Philosophy. I'm Phil. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you subscribe, share it, like it. You know what I'm like. Do whatever you want. I'll catch you on the flip side.